Welcome to the Anxiety Arcs podcast. I am your host, Dr. Russ Kennedy, and I'm going to talk today about my own personal journey with anxiety because I haven't really got into this too much over the years about how badly I suffered with it. Just to show that I'm not just some anxiety doctor that knows about this from academic points of view. I know about it because I lived it. I lived it for a long time and almost killed me. And I'll go back to the beginning. I had a father who was schizophrenic and bipolar and would often go off the rails. And I think I know when my mother was pregnant with me that he had a admission to a mental hospital for a suicide attempt. So that's got to be pretty stressful for my mother to know that she's going to deliver this baby and that her husband has just attempted suicide. I mean, I can't imagine the stress. I mean, my mother is tough. She's 92 now and, 91. She'll be 92 in August. And I just can't imagine the stress that she would have been under. And I think that may have played a role, when I was in utero, when your mother is stressed like that. And there's some data to point this out, that if the father is stressed, it's almost harder on the mother than if she is stressed by herself. Because I think the mother has to look after the father as well as look after this new baby. And my mother did a great job of looking after my brother and I with this crazy husband who wasn't always crazy. Granted, he wasn't always crazy. He had moments of brilliance. He was very loving and kind and tender and intelligent, but he was also very crazy too. So growing up, I didn't really know he was crazy until I was about 10 or 11. We lived in Ontario, which is kind of just above Detroit, I guess, for you Americans out there in the audience. And my father, during a manic episode when I was about 10 years old, decided that he was going to hitchhike across Canada. And he hitchhiked all the way to Victoria, British Columbia, which is where I live now, which is the farthest west that you can go. So that's what he did. He just got out there and just started hitchhiking across the country. And I always had a sense when I was younger that my dad wasn't quite right, but I still idolized him. Like, he was still an award-winning baseball coach, and he was a very good snooker player. And I would pick up the game as well and play at a pretty competitive level. I won my university championship for snooker 2 years in a row. But going back to when I was 10, something was wrong. I knew something was wrong because my mother packed my brother and I into the back of this Pontiac Stratochief, which is this big, huge boat of a car. She made a bed out of the back, and then she started driving from Brockville, Ontario, which is where we lived at the time, to Victoria, British Columbia. And I just felt uneasy back then. There was just something in me. I didn't feel safe. And I don't think I've ever felt safe. Until recently, I figured out how to do this safety thing. I don't think I've ever felt safe until recently. And that's been such a joy for my life. Like, my 60s have been my best decade by far. My 60s have been my best decade. So when I was younger, a teenager, I had some issues with bullying at school. I got bullied, not right through school, but at different points in school. And that was really hard for me because I was already a sensitive kid. And as most of us know with anxiety, I think we were born sensitive. There is some data that suggests that temperament is genetic. You're born with a certain level of sensitivity. And if you grow up in an environment where you're loved and cared for and you have a great attachment and attunement to your parents, that sensitivity becomes loving and caring. But if you are born sensitive in an environment where there's addiction, there's alarm, there's abuse, abandonment, trauma, that's really difficult because that gets put in our nervous system. And I believe that the definition of trauma from my end is a negative change in the nervous system that doesn't recover. It doesn't come back to normal again. So anything that changes your nervous system into protection rather than growth, because if you grow up with parents that are connected and attuned to you, you learn that life is about being connected and being attuned. And if you grow up in an environment where you are stressed and that's what you see all the time, you learn that life is about protection. And that forms your nervous system. I mean, the ages between 0 and 3, 0 to 5, but 0 to 3 especially, if you didn't get a lot of caring and nurturing at that age and you're sensitive, your nervous system is going to get forged in this protection, and you're going to look at life through the lens of protection for most of your life until you realize that there's another way. So when I was a teenager, I got bullied at points. I think the thing about bullying is that bullies read someone who's really suffering. I was really suffering at home because of my dad. And I think bullies see that and it resonates with something that they're suffering. If they're suffering and they see you suffering, you become an easy target. Then I'll break into a quick story here. My grade 7 bully came to me as a patient, and that was a very interesting conversation when I first went in to see him. Because I walk in, I grab his file, I walk in, I see his name, and I think couldn't be the same guy. And sure enough, it was the same guy. And he goes, "Hey, I know you." It's like, "Yeah, I know you too." And I wanted to say, "You made my life a living hell," but I didn't. And I listened to his story, and it was full of abuse and sexual abuse, and his sister was murdered, and just all this horrible, horrible stuff that he had to go through. And it really, this is 25 years after the fact that he's coming to see me as a patient. And it really softened my attitude towards him. It really did, because I really saw that as much as I went through this thing with my dad, which was pretty difficult, it wasn't nearly the childhood that this guy had. So I think bullies, they see their own pain in you. So if you have trouble at home, I think bullies see that, and I think they feel it, and I think they take it out on you. And for me, being a sensitive kid, it's not that I didn't fight back, but I didn't fight back hard enough. And I was always a small kid. I was always a small, sensitive kid. And I would cry when I got hurt up until I was about 6 years old, because if you know anything about boys, if you start crying, even at 4 years old, you get shamed for it. And I think that's one of the reasons why men, this is heavy, I think this is one of the reasons why men kill themselves, is because we take crying away from boys. Crying allows you to adapt to something. So as a male, if your dog dies or you're getting a divorce, that doesn't change. But with tears, you're able to perceive it differently. After you have tears, your attitude towards your dog dying and your attitude towards your divorce gets softer. And there is something very, very adaptive about tears. And I learned this from Gordon Neufeld about how crying allows you to process things. And I think because women are much easier to cry than men are, I think that's why they process emotional stuff better than we do, typically. So I saw this guy just suffering and came up with all these physical symptoms of pain that we could never really find reasons for. And now I know, I didn't know back then when I was seeing this bully of mine as a patient. Now I know that a lot of his emotional pain came out as physical symptoms. And I see that so much later on in my career. I could see it so much that emotional pain in childhood came out with things like irritable bowel syndrome. It came out with migraine headaches, came out with fibromyalgia. So irritable bowel has this incredible pain in your gut, but when we do biopsies of the bowel, everything looks normal. Fibromyalgia, terrible pain in your muscles. When we do biopsies, muscles look absolutely normal. So there's this tremendous link between emotional suffering in childhood and physical symptoms in adulthood, because I think we can only stuff the emotional pain down for so long. I think it has to come out. It's like whack-a-mole. I think it has to come out somewhere. And as we get older, I think it comes out in our bodies. I think that's just how it shows up. Excuse me. So seeing this bully and seeing the effect that the abuse had on him really softened me up towards him and really opened me up to the fact that emotional distress really leads into physical issues as you get older. And for me, my anxiety really peaked probably late teens, certainly in medical school, early 20s, but late teens, I started to get health anxiety. I started really worrying about, I had this sort of fibrous band of muscle in my neck, and I was convinced it was a tumor. So I went to see my doctor. My doctor said, no, don't be ridiculous. It's not a tumor. So I get this immediate, oh, I'm okay. And then next week I would have some abdominal pain that I was convinced was going to kill me. And I wasn't a doctor back then. So I had very rudimentary, cancer, basic stuff. But once I got into medical school, I got some really fancy terminal diagnoses in myself. I diagnosed myself with ALS. At one point, I diagnosed myself with dermatomyositis. I diagnosed myself with all these medical student syndrome diseases because I had so much emotional angst that I needed to put it somewhere, and I put it into physical symptoms. And I think a lot of people, specifically people that believe they have Lyme disease, and I don't want to rile people up with Lyme disease, but Lyme disease has these very non-specific symptoms, and so does childhood trauma. So I think a lot of people believe they have Lyme disease when really they have unresolved childhood trauma. Now, that may be controversial, but I've seen it so many times. And people want an answer for why they feel sick. So when you tell them they have Lyme disease, it's like, oh, well, this is the answer. Your dopamine circuits light up in your brain. Oh, we're on the right track. This is what's happening. And a lot of the times it's not. A lot of times you don't have Lyme disease. You believe you have Lyme disease because it's an easier way to quantify the pain that you're going through when you have an actual physical diagnosis for it. But it doesn't help. And typically things get worse over time. This is why chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, these things get worse over the course of time because you're not really getting at the root of the problem. You're not really dealing with the emotional root of the problem. You're trying to take different medications, which cause all sorts of side effects, which cause other syndromes, which make you think you have other diseases. So getting back to me in my early 20s, that's when my anxiety really started. That's when I stopped sleeping very well. I lost a bunch of weight. And later on, I'll tell you about the real weight loss that I had. But I just couldn't understand what was happening. I knew what I was going through in my late teens and early 20s wasn't normal, but I didn't know what anxiety was back then. I really had no idea. I'd seen my father go through schizophrenia and bipolar, and I was so concerned that was what was happening to me. I thought that I was starting to have the same disease that he had, when really I had anxiety. And I had anxiety because I was worried about getting the same disease that he had. Clearly, I didn't have it, but I was so worried that I was going to develop the same disease that he had because I saw him go through psychiatric intensive care, being just drugged out like a zombie. It's really painful. It was really painful for me to watch my dad crumble like that. And then he would get back to semi-normal in my mid-teens and early 20s. He started to really collapse where he just wasn't getting any better. And they were treating him with all sorts of different medications. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to be a doctor, because I wanted to be able to help my dad in a way that would make a difference, because I saw all the psychiatrists that he saw never really helped him. And I'm convinced that even if my dad showed up with his illness today, psychiatry still couldn't help him. It still wouldn't make much of a difference. It was that severe. So getting into my early 20s, I really wanted to get into medical school. Really wanted to get into medical school. And I didn't get it the first time. And then the second year, all my friends were getting it. Well, not all of them, but a bunch of them were getting in. They were getting letters like, hey, you've been accepted to medical school. And every time I would hear one of my friends, I was happy for them, but I was also crushed because I knew the letters for that institution had already gone out and I hadn't got one. So June comes around. Usually, in sort of April and May, if you get into med school for September, June comes around, no letter for me. And I am crushed because I really do think that I put a lot of my self-worth in being a doctor for a long, long time. And I thought if I could just get to medical school and get through medical school, then that would prove that I wasn't schizophrenic or bipolar, because the stress of medical school would show that up. I also knew that if you're going to show up with schizophrenia, likely it's before the age of 30, usually before the age of 25. So at 25, I didn't have schizophrenia, and I felt like, okay, let's wait till 30. At 30, I didn't have schizophrenia, and I had been through the majority of med school by then, so I felt better. But it wasn't until I hit 35 that I really thought, okay, you're not schizophrenic. It's not going to show up in you. And so far it hasn't. So that's good. But going through medical school was really, really hard. I thought of quitting a number of times. My anxiety was so bad. I remember sitting in class and I would just feel the drip, drip, drip of sweat in my armpits because I was just so anxious. I would call it alarmed now, but I was just so alarmed. And then I saw a psychiatrist in med school. I saw like 3 different psychiatrists in med school, and nothing really worked. Medications, they kind of dampened it down a little bit, but I was still anxious. I could cope better, and I think medications actually helped me get through med school without a doubt. I don't think I would have made it through med school without medication. But it was crushing for the first 2 years because I kept thinking, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to make it. There was a number of times, I think about 6 times, where I was seriously, like, the next morning I was going in to quit, going into the dean's office and saying, I can't do this anymore. And for some reason, I just stuck it out. And I think that's true for a lot of us anxious people, is we think we can't take it anymore. But really, there's a reserve in us. Anxious people are really actually quite strong. We're really strong. And the thing about that, the big illusion about that, is we think we're not. We think we're not strong. We have to do everything. I've said this a lot, but we have to do everything everyone else does. We have to go to school, go to work, raise our kids, but we have to do it with 100 pounds of fear on our back. And it's difficult. I remember sitting in movie theaters watching the movie, just petrified. And it would usually show up for me with health anxiety. My anxiety would come up, or should I say alarm, my alarm would come up, and then I would convince myself that I had some kind of disease, because that makes sense. It makes sense when you have this horrible sense of anxiety and fear in you that you want to make up a reason why you have this. You want to be able to say, this is what I have, even though it's painful. Like having cancer would be painful. Having having some sort of horrible tumor would be painful, but it would make sense of this horrible uncertainty, this horrible alarm that I would go through day after day after day. And then the weird part about it is, in the evenings, I would often feel better, to the point where I would think, oh, you don't even have anxiety at all. So I would wake up with this horrendous anxiety, horrendous alarm, I should say. And then as the day went on, it would get a little easier. And if I would go out with friends or socialize or be connected, it would go completely, which makes me think, this is my theory about anxiety and the default mode network. The default mode in your brain is what your brain does when you're not actually doing a specific task. So when you're not doing a specific task, your brain kind of daydreams. It goes into this sort of default state. And if this default state is firing up your body into anxiety, your life's going to be pretty uncomfortable. My life was horribly uncomfortable for a very long time. Managed to get through med school, came back home, started working in a clinic. It was okay. There was a huge disappointment in my life, because I thought being a doctor was going to solve everything. But being a doctor created a whole bunch of other problems, So I eventually burned out of medicine because, like, this is 20 years later. I'm skipping forward. I'm going to go back a little bit and talk more about early days as a medical doctor. It was funny because early days as a medical doctor, I really was hooked on that title of being a doctor. If someone called me Mr. Kennedy, I would get a little bit upset. The old Dr. Evil joke. It's like, I didn't go to Evil medical school for 6 years to be called Mr. Thank you very much. So being a doctor was huge for me. And I think it was my salvation, and it was also my sinking. It was killing me being a doctor, because I was so addicted to this version of me that was important, because growing up, I didn't feel important at all. My family's energy went into my father, a lot of my family's energy. So I felt kind of invisible, which is one of the reasons I think I do this now, because part of me loves being seen and the other part of me just hates it, just hates being out there and vulnerable. But I do feel like I have a message, and I think that message helps me. And I do feel I went through medical school for a purpose. It wasn't to practice medicine. It was to do what I'm doing now, to give me the credibility to go out there and talk about the neuroscience of anxiety and talk about it from a point of view of someone who's been there, because I have been there. I have been close to suicide with anxiety. In 2013, I'm skipping ahead to when I left medicine. I was suicidal. I had ruptured my left Achilles tendon, and I was in a boot cast, and I knew at that point that I had to leave. That was the straw that broke the doctor's back, was getting that left Achilles rupture. You know, the body says no. My body wasn't going to do it anymore. I wasn't going to be able to work in a clinic in downtown Vancouver anymore as a doctor, because it was just too much. And ironically, I could do stand-up. I could go up on stage, which usually scares the crap out of most people. But when I was doing stand-up, I actually felt, it was one of the first times that I felt that I didn't have a lot of anxiety. It was always there. It's always there. It's always been there for me. But it was one of the times that I felt that I had control over it, rather it controlling me. So I would work as a doctor, as an urgent care clinic, and then as in daytime, and then at the nighttime I would go and do stand-up, and I would tour with Yuck Yucks, which is the stand-up corporation here in Canada, the chain, and I loved it. I really enjoyed it. But eventually I ruptured my left Achilles tendon in 2013, and I couldn't do it anymore. The anxiety was so high at that particular point in time that I couldn't stand it any longer. So I left medicine, and that was a huge blow to me, because, as I said, being a doctor was a lot of my identity. And if I was going to lose that, you know, I didn't even know if life was worth living anymore, if I was going to live in a 10-hour panic attack every day and then lose this career that I thought was going to save me. But eventually, I met Cynthia, my third wife. I didn't go into my other two wives here. That's another 2 hours. I don't want to have to do that one. But I met Cynthia in 2013 in this personal development retreat when I was wearing my boot cast. And she saved my ass for sure. She saved my life. And I got together with Cynthia. We found out there was people from all over the world at this sort of retreat on Gabriola Island called the Haven. And we found out that we lived 33 blocks from each other. And as soon as we got back from this sort of course, which is a 25-day course, I moved in with her. And I've been with her ever since. But I remember back then in those days that I wouldn't get up until noon or 1. I would just sleep and sleep and sleep, because sleep was an escape. I could escape into sleep. And I would get up around 1 or 2. And then by 7 p.m., things would start to feel a little bit better. But I remember just being in this sort of panicky, alarmed state for hours at a time. And I remember thinking that life just hurt. It wasn't that I was going through life and my life was passing me by, or I was bored or whatever. It was like life hurt. It really, every day, it fucking hurt. So around 2015, I started doing psychedelics. I haven't done a lot of psychedelics, but I did psychedelics. I did LSD with a friend of mine who was very versed in psychedelics. And that's when I saw that my anxiety was this state of alarm in my body. The anxiety I thought that was in my mind was in this state of alarm in my body. And then a year after that, I went to one of the Gordon Neufeld master classes and learned about alarm. He doesn't use alarm in the same way that I do, but it really clicked for me. Oh, this anxiety that I feel in my head, in my mind, is really this alarm that I feel in my body. This is really where this is coming from, is this alarm. And if I can find a way to calm the alarm in my body, and then over time I did somatic experiencing training and did somatic therapy and did some IFS work. But the psychedelics, they didn't heal me by any means at all. They created a paradigm so that I knew what I was dealing with. Now, I knew I was dealing with this state of alarm in my body rather than trying to chase the thoughts of my mind. So once I knew that it was an alarm-based body problem, I was able to have some sense of what I was really dealing with instead of this illusion, this ghost of these chronic, typically health worries, but just worries in general. And then once I really figured out, oh, it's alarm. This is what I'm dealing with is alarm. It's not anxiety at all. It's this state of alarm in my body that's causing all this problem. And then I really started focusing on, okay, how do I understand this alarm? And then I understand the alarm as Rusty, as the younger version of me, who grew up with this dad who was sometimes there, sometimes not, sometimes crazy, sometimes in the hospital from a suicide attempt. So once I figured out what I was dealing with, I was able to kind of understand it in a way that I'd never understood it before. And it made sense to me, like viscerally, it made sense to me that this is what I was dealing with, was this state of alarm that's in my body. And my mind was just a mirror. It was just reflecting the state of alarm that was in my body. So I started doing more work in this environment, doing more of Gordon Neufeld's courses about, how the brain develops. And then really, I mean, I've always loved neuroscience. I've always been focused on neuroscience and about how these neuroscientific pathways in the brain really feed this sense of alarm through the body, through the autonomic nervous system, and a whole bunch of other stuff that I'm not going to get into with this particular podcast. But it's really understanding that it's alarm that I was suffering from all those years. It was this state of alarm. It wasn't my anxiety. And all the therapists that tried to fix my worries, to try to make me think better, oh, you got nothing to worry about. You're fine. You're safe. That wasn't it. The alarm, I've come to know, is the younger version of me. And once I saw that I could connect with the younger version of me, who I call Rusty, then the alarm started to fade. And when the alarm started to fade, because the alarm was driving the worries in the first place, the worries faded. And that's what gave me the impetus to start writing the book, Anxiety RX, and working on it. So all the time I was writing the book, I was looking at different therapies, body-based therapies, understanding, like every morning I would wake up with these ideas. What if we put our hand over it? What if we connect to it? What if we see it as the younger version of us? What if we look into the child's eyes, look into the younger version of you, look into their eyes, see if you can connect with them, see if you can just be grateful for them and know that they hold the very best parts of you. I know that Rusty holds my generosity, he holds my intelligence, he holds my sense of humor, but I was sending him out, castigating him for a long time because he also held my pain. He also held my pain. So I had to push him away because he held my pain. And the more I pushed him away, the more alarmed he got. And I realized, I just knew that pushing that child away was causing me more pain. And as I started to see that reconnection, because I say that anxiety is basically a separation of your adult self from your child self and a separation of your mind from your body. You wind up living in your head, and the adult part of you doesn't want to revisit the child because the child holds all the pain, and the child doesn't trust the adult in us because we've left them alone for so long. So anxiety is this state of alarm in my body. And once I really realized that, I started making some traction. I started looking after the younger version of me. And it took a while for him to trust me because I had, been there. Adult me has been around child me for decades and not really taken care of him. And as cliche as it sounds, self-care, all that kind of stuff, it's the only thing that worked. It's the only thing that helped me. I've seen like 10 psychiatrists in my life, probably 30 psychologists. I've done tapping, EMDR, just about every therapy that there is. And the only thing that's made real long-lasting change in me is finding this alarm in my body, seeing it as the younger version of me, and for the first time, do this what I call should. I see him, hear him, open to him, understand him, love him, and defend him. I give him now what he should have got back then. And that's what's really helped. That's what's really helped me get out of this. That's what makes me look back and go, I'm glad that I survived. I'm glad that I didn't wind up taking my own life, because my 60s have been my best decade so far. And I hope to keep making an impact in the world, keep making an impact, helping people not have to suffer as I did, because you don't have to. There is a way out. You have to understand what you're dealing with first, which is this alarm in your body. The worries are just a byproduct. But once you start seeing that that alarm is the younger version of you, and you start looking after that younger version of you, and you start seeing that younger version of you as important, as worthy, as the part of you that holds the best part of you, then you really start to heal. So thanks for listening to me today. I kind of rambled there, but I hope it makes sense to you. Anxiety almost killed me, and I don't want it to have to kill you. I want to be able to make a real difference for people. And I think that comes from the impotence of not being able to help my father. I want to help you in the way that I could never help my dad. And I'll see you next time.